I love dragons. You take a big lizard, give it some wings, and have it breathe fire, and I am instantly hooked into whatever it is you're selling to me. And I love dragons no matter where they come from. Chinese dragons, European dragons, American dragons, Japanese dragons. They're all awesome. And Fire Emblem realized this very early on into its life cycle. Units that can transform into dragons have existed since the start of the franchise, and they're often very important to the lore of whatever game they're in. So today, I wanted to look at how the dragon unit has evolved since the start of the franchise, and see how it's changed from game to game. First up, the ground rules, and this one's pretty simple compared to any other class. These are units that transform into dragons. I am not talking about every unit that has draconic blood in them. I'm not going to be talking about Gato or Sophia, because while they have dragon blood, they are not dragon units. I am also not going to be talking about the units that ride dragons. Those are an entirely different class, and we will cover Wyvern Riders in their own video, which is basically just me saying this shit's broken as hell for an entire hour. And finally, when we get to games with reclassing, I'm not going to talk about the dragons reclassed into something else. If you're watching a video about dragon units, I don't think you want to hear me talk about Griffin Rider Tiki. That's just not what this video is about. So that's it. Units that transform into dragons. Nice, simple, with no exceptions. And don't forget to leave a like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel, or else I will break into your house and make you feel unsafe. No exceptions.
There is no meme. This is just a threat.
Starting off with Archanea, dragons, called manaketes, are all incredibly powerful, having their dragon powers contained within a stone that lets them shift into powerful enemies and allies. In fact, manaketes are kind of the driving force behind the plot of the first game, as the racial prejudice against them by humans is the driving factor behind the main villain Medeus. So there's a lot to dive into if we want to talk about the lore side of things. But if we're looking at the gameplay side of things, manaketes are defensive beasts. Their stones give them massive buffs to their physical defense, meaning unless you have a Worm Slayer specifically designed to kill them, you're gonna struggle to deal any physical damage to them, though their resistance is poor like everyone else in Archanea. On top of this, dragon stones never deplete in usage, so you do not have to worry about managing inventory and weapon durability with them. You just hand them a stone, and they're going to go on a tear for the entire map. Though in terms of playable dragon units, you only get 2. And for those of you not familiar with the series' origins, you might think of how Fire Emblem really likes to have dragon units be little girls or young women, and you'll be shocked to learn that the first manakete in the entire franchise is an old-ass man. Bantu is one of those units that if you don't know how the mechanics of FE1 work, you might think would be absolutely terrible. If you look at his base stats, sans HP, they're all below 5, and absolute garbage. If you look at his growth rates, he doesn't really have growth rates, barely getting anything in anything. So, naturally, Bantu is one of the strongest units for most of the entire game. It all boils down to his Dragonstone, giving him 12 more defense, which gives him 15 total, and a lot of enemies in FE1 cannot pierce that very easily. In the original Fire Emblem games, all stats capped at 20, and think, if they cap at 20, most enemies don't get even close to that, so 15 defense is actually insane. Bantu can go on the front lines of a lot of maps and not be in any real danger. And, as I mentioned back in the Archer video, a lot of Archanea's maps do have natural choke points where you can slap Bantu on it and call it a strategy. It'll be a slow strategy, but a genuinely effective one. And Bantu's Dragonstone does a lot of damage, and though his attack speed is only 1 because of his base speed and the weight of the stone, That's actually enough to double a lot of enemies because weapons weigh them down to 0 speed. He does have weaknesses though. As the game goes on, 15 defense and no other stats will eventually catch up to him, and enemies are really going to hurt him. And he's weak to magic. Not in terms of like effective damage, he's just going to die if a mage looks at him. Now, all units in Fire Emblem 1 have 0 resistance, so you might think, alright, well Bantu's no weaker than anyone else from magic. But you see, other units have attack speed to help them not get doubled and dodge, or a functioning HP stat to tank a few magic attacks. Bantu has neither of these, so if he sees a mage, he's going to die. This does not make him weak though. Bantu is a genuinely powerful unit and can be a crutch for your army for over half the game. He just genuinely has a shelf life that you need to respect when it's time to put him on the bench. He's strong, but not completely broken. Tiki is your second dragon unit, and she essentially functions as the Bantu replacement, especially given that you need him to recruit her, so his final act is giving you a better him. Tiki's stats are much better than Bantu's. Her base stats are a little low, but her growth rates are among the best in the game, and she will quickly level up into an absolute monster. Her Dragonstone gives even more defense than Bantu's, meaning she has the same virtual immunity to physical attacks, except high enough to actually matter in the late game. She will do an incredible job tanking on the front lines, and she is genuinely the best in the game at that. Tiki is an amazing unit to use, and doesn't really even require that much investment to get going. The only thing Tiki has going against her is that she does show up very late in the game, so she doesn't have as much time to rely on as Bantu did. But still, that does not stop her from being a great choice for your endgame army. Also, something I didn't mention for Bantu, but works for both him and Tiki, due to the sheer defense and strength given to them by their stones, you can patch up their other stats with stat boosters pretty well. A single speed wing can actually make Bantu fast enough to not get doubled in the late game, and if you want to try giving them Draco shields, their defenses that were already good are going to be nigh impregnable. So just consider that sometime. It's probably not the best usage of stat boosters, but it's a funny one, and that means it's more important. The third and final dragon unit in Fire Emblem 1 who isn't actually someone that becomes a dragon is Xane. Now I know what you're thinking, didn't you say you weren't going to talk about units that weren't dragons, no exceptions? I lied. Xane is just kinda hard to talk about because there's no video where you can realistically put Xane in except this one, because he's such a unique unit, so I'm just putting him here because there's nowhere else he fits. Xane's gimmick is that he can transform into any of your other units, Bantu and Tiki notwithstanding. He'll copy all of their stats down to a T, and then will just go out and fight as them for about 5 turns, where he will then D-shift into his weak base stats and need to transform again. Xane is actually a very good unit, because literally, you just take your best unit, now you have 2 best units. Zane's biggest sin is that he's mildly annoying to use, because you have to spend the first turn walking next to the unit you want him to become and transforming, so Xane cannot attack on the first turn. Often not that big a deal, but it also becomes a problem when he D-shifts, and you might not have him close by to whoever he shifted into, so he's gonna have to shift into whoever's near him, and that might not be someone who has the same weapons that Xane has on his inventory, and it can just be a little difficult to plan around. Not impossible, but mildly aggravating, which is the real strike against Xane. Why deal with all that bullshit when you could just deploy another unit that doesn't need to worry about de-shifting? Still, he is very good if you're willing to put up with the nonsense. And especially if you're doing an Iron Man, where you might have slim pickings as to who's around, letting him just become another one of your carries is genuinely very good. He is a solid unit, and is worth considering whenever you're playing through Fire Emblem 1.
And what are you supposed to be?
You.
Fire Emblem Gaiden does not have any dragon units that are playable, and in fact, doesn't really have any dragon units that are enemies either, sans its final boss, Duma. Duma's really cool for lore reasons, as in Fire Emblem 1, they explain that if dragons don't bind their power to stones, they'll eventually go through a process called degeneration and go mad. And here Duma is, going through that exact process. So it's kinda neat to see what they were talking about in the first game, but beyond that, he's not the most interesting. He's your normal Fire Emblem final boss. You attack him, he's tanky, he can do some good damage. Getting to him is more difficult than he himself. But still, he is a dragon unit, and I wouldn't have anything to talk about in Gaiden if I didn't talk about that. So moving on. Fire Emblem 3 changed how dragon units work from Fire Emblem 1 in a way I really like. Instead of your stones being an infinite durability item you keep on a dragon and then they transform, they become a usable item that, when used, will transform the manakete into a dragon for 5 turns, and then an additional amount of turns that's random but dependent on your luck stat. While being a dragon, they gain a stat increase based on which stone you use to transform them. It's a long table, I'll just put it on screen so you can look at it if you want to. And their breath attack is now 1 to 2 range, allowing them to be even better on the front lines in attacking anything that hits them. Though their breath now has a weapon weight of 20, which lowers their speed to 0 no matter what it is, but this seems like a conscious effort to nerf 1 to 2 range weapons, because the javelin has a similar weight problem. But, even though they can't double, Dragon Breath ignores enemy defense, unless the enemy's a fellow manakete. So because of this, even though they can't double, dragons can still do massive damage and outright one-shot a lot more enemies than you would think, or put a dent in anything. They are genuinely very good and fun units to use, and Bantu and Tiki benefit greatly from this change in mechanic. They are genuinely great units in both Book 1 and Book 2, though Bantu, like before, does fall off and will eventually be replaced by Tiki in both games, but still, they are great to use while you have them. Xane got worse for absolutely no reason though. Now in Fire Emblem 3, he doesn't copy the target's HP stat anymore, so he's stuck with his very bad low HP even when transformed. I don't know why they nerfed him like this, but he's now a lot worse and really only worth using to maybe copy some mages. Tiki actually has a very interesting buff in this game, and that's the ability to use even more Dragon Stones than just her Divine Stone and Bantu's Fire Stone. She can use the Wyvern Stone to become a Flying Wyvern, granting poor offensive buffs compared to her other stones, but getting a whopping 12 movement. There's the Mage Dragon Stone, which offers an insane buff to both defense and resistance, and makes her virtually immortal. And then there's the Ice Dragon Stone, which lets her become a dragon that has effective damage against fire dragons. They're all really cool, but they're obtained in a really stupid way. These really neat stones that completely change Tiki as a unit are only found in a secret shop on Tiki's recruitment map that requires you warp a unit into an area that they cannot get out of once they're warped there, and you just kind of have to figure that there's some secret over there. Once you know that it's there, it can be very fun to play with these stones. I just wish for such a cool mechanic it was actually given to the player normally. A lot of Fire Emblem 3 players probably don't even know that Tiki can do this, and I think that's sad. Still, really useful. Moving on to Fire Emblem 4 and 5, the Jugdral games have no dragon units whatsoever. No manaketes, no enemy dragons, no nothing. Dragons still exist in the lore, as the 12 Crusaders of the game were given dragon blood and that's why they're so powerful, but as for a unit that transforms into a dragon, the best you got are Julius and Julia's spells having dragons show up in their attack animation. That's as good as you're gonna get, so we're just gonna move on. Manaketes do make a comeback in Fire Emblem 6, where their lore, in the Super Cliff Notes version, is that dragons ruled the world. Humans went, damn, that shit sucks. And then they created global warming, which forced the dragons to leave because the climate was no longer inhabitable for them. So they all went into a pocket dimension, except some of them that stayed behind for some reason. Super abridged lore aside, Manaketes largely have the same role as enemies as they did in Archanea, incredibly powerful physical damage sponges, though they're back to Fire Emblem 1 dragons where they can't attack at 2 range, and their resistance is noticeably less than their defense, so magic is the best way to deal with them. Though it's worth noting that if you want to do physical damage, Manaketes also have a weakness to all of the S-rank weapons, so that's something to keep in mind. Gonzalez with the R mods can absolutely destroy them. As for playable dragons, you just get the one Manakete, the tiny little Fae. She has a few problems. Her Dragonstone is no longer unlimited use like an FE1, and it doesn't transform her for an extended period of time like an FE3. She gets 30 attacks, and once she attacks those 30 times, she can no longer do anything, because there's no other Dragonstone for her to get, and no way to repair her stone once it breaks. While Fae can do a lot of damage, that limited use really comes back to bite her. It's very difficult to actually level her up when leveling her up requires you to use the precious few attacks that she has. If you do try to use her, she can do good damage, it's just a very, very difficult resource to manage. What isn't difficult, though, is using Fae to take advantage of really, really weird staff AI. In Fire Emblem 6, enemy staff users like Berserk and Sleep are more likely to target units at the bottom of your deployment list. So if you just have Fae set to the bottom of your deployment, they'll all target her. And since status staves are affected by your resistance, they don't have a very good chance of hitting her because her resistance, even at base, is incredibly high. And on top of that, Fae's Dragonstone doesn't deplete if she can't counterattack, so she doesn't have to worry about it breaking to absorb status staves. And given how powerful some bishops are in the late game with this, it's actually worth the deployment slot just to have Fae soak up these staves. It's not exactly the purpose you would expect a dragon to have, but it's a genuinely useful purpose nonetheless. Fire Emblem 7 does not have any Manaketes to play as, nor are there any dragon enemies except for the final boss, the nameless Fire Dragon. And it is, once again, a Fire Emblem final boss. Getting to it is more difficult than actually fighting it. If you have Canis or Athos with Luna, that thing's going down very easily. But it is the only dragon unit in the game, so yeah. Moving on. Manaketes in Fire Emblem 8 have a bit different lore than games prior. Fire Emblem 8 is a world where monsters exist. Skeletons, centaurs, gorgons, etc. And Manaketes are kind of a half-breed between monsters and humans. They're too monstrous to exist peacefully with humans, and too human to exist peacefully with monsters, so they only really stick to themselves. It's a different take on how being a Manakete is depressing as hell, and I like it. But in terms of playable Manaketes, you only get one. The young girl Myrrh, and she is basically Fae done a little bit better. First of all, she has wings even when not transformed, so her mobility is pretty useful as a flying unit. And she has 50 uses of a Dragonstone instead of only 30, and she appears late enough into the game where you can logically deploy her in every map, use her, and not worry about the Dragonstone breaking mid-game. And when transformed, she does the normal Manakete stuff. A lot of damage, a lot of tanking ability, she's really powerful. And, to boot, she has an effective damage modifier against monsters. And after Chapter 20, monsters are all you face in the game, so that's actually pretty useful. Especially if you want to dabble in the post-game and have to deal with that goddamn room of 10 Draco zombies. That really hurt if Myrrh isn't there. But using Myrrh in the post-game is also difficult because when you have to go through the Lagdo Ruins and Tower of Volney 3 times, that's when the 50 uses of the Dragonstone are going to be a bit of a problem, and just like in FE6, you cannot repair it with the Hamurn Staff, and you cannot get another Dragonstone anywhere. Okay, since I know I'm going to get actually'd in the comments, you can technically repair Myrrh's Dragonstone by using a glitch to take control of enemies and then trade Myrrh's Dragonstone onto a Gorgon egg, and then when that egg hatches, all of the items that it was holding will have their durability set to maximum, so then you retake control of enemies to trade those items back to you, but that's like a glitch that requires a lot of steps, clearly not something that's supposed to happen, but if I didn't bring up how it can technically repair Myrrh's Dragonstone, someone would have called me cringe in the comments, and I cannot live for that. And going back to the Draco zombies I was talking about earlier, I guess they are technically dragons, so I'll talk about them here. You only face 3 of them in the main story of Fire Emblem 8, but they're all very powerful, incredibly tanky, do a fuck ton of damage. They are genuinely a great threat that you have to worry about, despite how scarce they are in the game, and they fucking look cool. It's a zombie dragon. That's fucking awesome. So, yeah, Draco zombies. I like them. Moving on to Fire Emblem 9, the entire premise of that game's story centers around the Legus, a race of people that can transform into various different animals. Lions, hawks, wolves, and of course, dragons. Now, separating the Dragon Legus from the rest of them might seem a little weird, but think of it more so of, I'm talking about the dragons with fellow dragons, and I'll be talking about the likes of Leith and Mordecai with beast units like Pan or Keaton. So, it's a little weird, but you just roll with it here. The lore of the Dragon Legus specifically is that they are from the nation of Goldoa, and they maintain a strong, neutral presence to everything that's going on around them. They don't involve themselves in conflicts, they don't involve themselves with other nations, they don't want anything to do with anyone. As their beast and bird brothers and sisters get racially profiled, put into slavery, and all kinds of other nasty shit, they just don't do anything because that's not their goddamn business. And of course, this kind of thinking ends the way this kind of thinking always ends. They're able to have it not be any of their business until it very much becomes their business, and that could have been avoided if they just helped people in the first place. But that's neither here nor there. As for the units in Fire Emblem 9, you get 2 of them, and I'm going to talk about them at the same time because they serve the same general function. Ina and her grandfather Nasir. They both show up with only 2 chapters left in the entire game, and they both have a similar identity as a unit. They're very bulky, they can hit decently strong, and they come with useful survival skills. Renewal recovers their HP every turn, and Boon instantly cures them if they're ever hit by a status condition, of which there are several scary ones on the final 2 maps. Ina and Nasir also have a very slow transformation gauge. Basically, Legus units do not have a stone to transform like all the other types of animal units in the series. They have to transform when their transformation gauge reaches its highest level of 20, and their gauge starts at a certain number depending on the unit, and once it hits 20, they will transform. And then every battle and every turn will decrease the gauge. Once it hits 0, they de-shift, and then rinse and repeat until the end of the map. Nasir and Ina start growing very slowly, but once they transform, they're shifted for the entire battle basically, as battles take away very little of their gauge. But by the time you get them, you'll have an item called the Demi Band, which lets a Legus stay shifted the entire map, in exchange for a small stat penalty, but Nasir and Ina's stats are so good that's largely negligible. And aside from their natural bulk, Ina and Nasir are among the only units capable of damaging the final boss of the game. Ashnard is the main villain of FE9, and he's kind of a shitload of fuck. His armor makes him only damageable by Ike, Ina and Nasir, and then one of the 3 Laguz royals you can pick on the final map. So on a given playthrough, you can only have 3 units capable of damaging Ashnard. And on top of that, only 2 on Hardened Maniac, because the Laguz Royal will not show up on the final map in those difficulties until after you've depleted Ashnard's first health bar, so their ability to help is actually greatly limited. So, okay, they have a very real purpose in the final map of the game. The thing that's interesting is that you can only get one of them, and Nasir is better in every way. Ina and Nasir's recruitment hinges on what happens in the Black Knight fight. For those that aren't aware, in Fire Emblem 9, towards the end of the game, Ike has a battle against his main rival, the Black Knight, with his sister Mist laying down healing support. If Ike defeats the Black Knight, you get Nasir. But you can escape from the Black Knight fight, and if you do that, you get Ina instead. This is significant because the Black Knight fight, even when properly trained for, comes down to pure RNG. If you're going for a Ragnall Ether thing, then you just need to hope Ike procs Ether enough. If you're going for a Wrath Resolve kind of thing, you just have to hope the Black Knight doesn't proc Luna and kill you when you're in Resolve range. It is largely luck whether or not you beat the Black Knight. So, even though Nasir is what you get for beating the Black Knight, he might not be worth it if you're just getting fucked over by bad RNG, or if you haven't trained Ike that well, and you might want to just leave and deal with getting Ina. Though this kind of creates a problem. If you're weak and you can't beat the Black Knight, well then that means you'd want Nasir's better combat to deal with Ashnard, because your Ike clearly isn't strong enough to deal with him. But if you're strong enough to beat the Black Knight, that means your Ike is well trained, and he's gonna be able to handle Ashnard, so you don't need Nasir. So it's basically a case of the rich getting richer. So personally, I would have had these two reversed, or maybe if you beat the Black Knight, you just get Ina and Nasir, and then you have both of them to deal with the final 2 maps? I don't know, I think that would be a fair reward, but you know, what do I know? I don't design video games. I just yell at people who do.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
Have you ever looked at a giant fire-breathing dragon and thought to yourself, man, that could probably make a really good support unit? Well, congratulations! Radiant Dawn bizarrely agrees with you. In between Fire Emblem 9 and 10, the Dragon Laguz were all given special support skills to help their allies in battle. Red Dragons were given the Red Tide skill, an ability that has adjacent allies' strength and skill increased by 5, a very substantial buff to their offensive prowess. White Dragons have the skill White Pool, which in addition to being what I leave in your mother every night, is also a skill that increases magic and speed of adjacent allies by 5. Again, a very useful skill. And Black Dragons have Night Tide, a skill that increases defense and resistance of adjacent allies by 5. Not as useful, because by the time in the game where you get a Black Dragon, you care much more about your offensive ability than your defensive ability, but it has its uses. The first dragon you get is Ina, making her return from Path of Radiance, and is recruited in the game's endgame, which is 5 battles back to back to back, and she is a required deployment in all 5 of them. Ina is not the greatest unit offensively. While she's still decently powerful compared to a lot of other Radiant Dawn units, the endgame has you choosing all of the best units from all of your armies, and combine that with the Laguz Royals that you get, Ina's just not going to be as good as everyone else around her. Still, Red Tide's usefulness cannot be overstated. Giving someone 5 strength just for being next to them is a huge buff, so even if Ina doesn't fight anything, she can still be very helpful by putting her towards the front lines. Not the greatest role in the game, but it's still something she can do. Kurth Naga makes me really sad, because he is a black dragon, he is a royal dragon, and you would think that that would make him really useful. No. He's recruited with only 5 maps left in the game, and he's a growth unit. I don't think I need to explain to you why that's a big problem. His support skill is the worst of the 3 dragon types, and yeah, sure, you can train him and he'll be able to contribute, but there's just no time left for that. The only thing he really has going for him is that on the 3rd endgame map, none of the enemies will attack him. So if you give him Paragon and just let him go off, you can get his good growth rates, but you're doing a lot of work for something that only has 2 chapters of payoff. I get why he's weaker, right? He's inexperienced, he hasn't been fighting, but that doesn't make him satisfying to use. I just really wish he was better, because his transformed state looks really cool. But unfortunately, looking really cool is all Kurth has going for him. And to be honest, Gareth doesn't have much going for him either. He's a stronger version of Ina, but he's only available on the final 2 endgame maps, and those enemies are almost all magical enemies, and Gareth's weakest stat is his resistance, making him very frail for the last few maps. Still, Red Tide is an absurdly powerful skill, so he can still find some level of usefulness. And there are tiles that increase resistance that you can put him on to help him out a little bit. He's not going to be very great, and unlike Ina, isn't a mandatory deployment, but if you have to deploy him because one of your units died, he can do a job well enough. He's just not that great. He is hardcore saved by how useful Red Tide is. Nasir, on the other hand, is actually quite competent. Increasing your ally's speed by 5 is really useful for the final 2 maps, and his emphasis on magical attack and resistance is very useful. He's incredibly resilient on the last 2 maps, and he's arguably the safest way to deal with the semi-final boss. He again suffers from not being there for the entire game, and you don't get a free deployment slot for him like Ina and Kurth Naga, but if you want to deploy him instead of someone else you brought in the tower, he's going to be pretty useful, so it's worth thinking about that. The dragons in Radiant Dawn really just aren't the greatest. Their support skills hardcore bail them out, but hey, having a really useful support skill is genuinely really useful. Just don't expect your dragons to be carrying your run very well. Unfortunately for dragon lovers, Shadow Dragon and New Mystery are not much better for dragons than Radiant Dawn. The remakes absolutely fucked over the manaketes. Instead of having an infinite use stone, or a stone that transforms you for a few turns, their dragon stones now function like every other weapon. They have a set amount of uses, and when their uses are done, they break. And, what makes matters worse, is that they can only attack at 1 range, and getting attacked from 2 range depletes a usage of the Dragon Stone, even though they can't counterattack, unlike Fae and 6, who didn't have this problem. Enemy dragons don't have to worry about this, so they're still threatening when you face them as enemies, but your allied dragons suffer a lot for this. Very specifically, Bantu. Bantu's weapon is now significantly worse, and Shadow Dragon's higher difficulties wildly inflate the stats from the first game, and Bantu is not adjusted for this, meaning his horrible growth rates and horrible base stats, which used to not matter, are now an Achilles heel. he genuinely struggles to do anything on the higher difficulties. He's gone from a genuinely amazing unit to one of the worst in the entire franchise, and it is really painful to watch Bantu fall from grace. Tiki fares a little bit better than Bantu. In the general sense, she suffers from all of his same problems. The nerf to Dragonstones and the inflation of enemy stats means she genuinely struggles to kill anything. Except other dragons. Her Divine Breath is super effective against them, and she can reliably one-shot a lot of the non-boss ones, and do massive damage to the boss ones. And that is a great niche for her to have. Her ability to fight anything other than them is suspect at best, but she's noticeably one of the best ways to deal with Medeus in this game. Because on the higher difficulties, Marth is not doing shit to him, and most of your other units aren't going to be able to touch him as well, except Tiki. So she has a very important role, it's just, in everything other than that role, she really struggles to keep up. Xane makes his return as well, and he's arguably more useful here than he was in Fire Emblem 1 and 3. Because the games are much harder, so having another Juggernaut is much more useful. Making Xane into a second Sheeta is genuinely fantastic and can help change maps dramatically for you. He does still have something that's slightly annoying though, as now he does copy the maximum HP of who he's turning into, unlike FE3, but he doesn't set his HP to theirs. He transforms with his current HP, still his current HP, which means you'll need to heal him if you intend to send him on the front lines. Again, not that bad, but mildly annoying, which Xane just can't seem to escape for some reason, even in a game where he's genuinely really good. Shadow Dragon also added a new fourth dragon, the young woman named Nagi, and her recruitment is actually kind of funny because she's in a Gaiden map, but unlike all of the other infamous Shadow Dragon Gaiden maps, her recruitment makes a lot of sense. The way that you get Chapter 24X is if you don't have the falchion and Tiki is dead. Unlike randomly killing off a lot of your units, this is a completely understandable ask for the player, because it's clearly not something you're supposed to get, it's a failsafe. Medeus, the final boss, is genuinely very powerful, and as I said before, Tiki's your best way to deal with him. And the game looks at you as you go into the final chapter and says, wow, you don't have the falchion or Tiki? Damn, this bitch sucks at Fire Emblem, and gives you Nagi, whose entire purpose is to kill Medeus. Her stats are pretty good, and with the effective bonus from the Divine Dragonstone, she genuinely can fight Medeus pretty consistently. But just because Nagi is the intended failsafe for if you don't have the anti-Medeus weapons, you can still have her and the falchion and Tiki. The way to do this is to give Tiki the falchion and then kill her off in Chapter 24. As you go in between 24 and 25, the game will notice that you don't have Tiki or the falchion and will give you 24X with Nagi. Then, in either Chapter 24X or Chapter 25, you can revive Tiki with the Alm Staff, which is only possible in the remakes because in the original game you could only use it in one spot on Chapter 24. And when Tiki gets revived, she'll come back with the falchion still in her inventory, meaning that you'll get the falchion and both Divine Dragons. And with two of them, you can actually consistently deal with Medeus pretty easily, even on the highest difficulties, which is kind of funny and kind of cool. Fire Emblem 12 doesn't really shake things up too much from Fire Emblem 11. Bantu is still useless, arguably even more useless, and Tiki still does what she did in FE11. Kill dragons and then not kill much else, though she's no longer effective against Medeus, so now she's a little bit worse than she was before. And Tiki's also less fun in this game, because of a really dumb decision that they made in Fire Emblem 12's higher difficulties. In Lunatic, the Warp Staff you get in Chapter 14 is now a Fortify Staff. And sure, Warp is incredibly powerful, but now you have no way to get to the secret shop. Tiki can't get any more of her cool attacking stones on Lunatic or Lunatic Reverse. So you're just kinda stuck with a Divine Stone, which is useful, but they went from having this mechanic be secret in FE3 to unusable in FE12 on higher difficulties. Why are they so against letting you play around with Tiki's multiple Dragon Stones? It's such a fun mechanic! Anyways, Xane stocks continue to be high, because due to FE12's high difficulty, having Xane transform into anything is still really useful. In fact, he can transform into the Dancer Fina, and now you've got 2 dancers running around, and that's just ridiculous. There's also a funny little thing you can do with Xane, where you can cheese the arena, because when the arena looks at Xane, they take into account his untransformed Freelancer stats, not whatever he transformed into. So he can very easily steamroll through the arena and let you get a lot of money without needing to save scum. And a lot of money means a lot of stat boosters. And a lot of stat boosters means a lot of stats. And a lot of stats means something, probably useful. So you should consider that next time you play FE12. And Nagi is kind of just a Tiki you get later, but a little stronger. As since she's no longer super effective against Medeus, she's only super effective against all the dragons before Medeus. But those dragons are pretty threatening, so Nagi gets the job done pretty well. Though you will need to give her an energy drop or some experience to get her to reliably kill them in one shot. So yeah, FE12 dragons are something. Fire Emblem Awakening takes the same stone with a set amount of uses approach from the GBA games and the Archanea remakes, but they have one fundamental difference that changes everything. You can buy the goddamn stones in a shop. And I mean a regular ass shop. Not a secret shop that's only available on easier difficulties. Honest to God shops sell Dragon Stones, so you don't have to worry about ever running out. On top of that, your Dragon Stone gets upgraded to a Dragon Stone Plus later on in the game, with late game shops selling those, so your manaketes can contribute at every point in the game and not have to worry about ever running out of their only weapon. It took them until the 3DS to figure that out, but you know what? They got there, and I think that's all that matters. And the Dragon Breath attack is a little bit better than the last games that it's been in, because it is a 1-2 range attack that doesn't come with the massive speed penalty that it did in FE3, so your manakete units are always capable of defending themselves, and that's really useful for them. Now, there are no enemy manaketes in Fire Emblem Awakening, unless you really want to get technical and say if you deploy a manakete in a versus paralog, so we're just gonna have to go with the units that are player manaketes, because there are no enemies to talk about. Naui is an interesting case. She has really good growth rates, and her strengths as a manakete are very clear. The 1-2 range, the constant stones. She seems like she should be a really good unit. Naui has one problem. Well, actually, it's several problems. All of her base stats are pretty goddamn terrible. The buffs from the Dragon Stone help alleviate it a little bit, but for a while she's not going to be doing that great of damage, and her speed is the biggest problem, as she gets doubled on higher difficulties very easily, and needs a lot of time to catch up. Granted, once you give her some level ups under her belt, she will start to be a genuinely useful unit who can handle herself without much of any help needed, but this is Fire Emblem Awakening. Every goddamn unit's a growth unit, so you have a lot of characters you get before her that have had more time to level up and aren't as useless as Naui is when she joins. So yeah, you can use Naui if you like manaketes, and with a little bit of elbow grease, she will be able to contribute in a meaningful way. it's just not the most efficient thing to do. You're only doing it if you like manaketes. Which, to be fair, dragons are cool. Tiki makes her return in this game, and she is very solid. Her only thing against her is her poor availability, showing up pretty late in the game in an optional paralog. But if you decide to go complete her paralog, which, while it is very difficult, there is a cheese strat you can do by rescuing her to a wall, and then enemies will only attack 3 units, and once you have her, she will do just fine. She starts at a very high level, but manaketes get a boosted EXP yield compared to other classes, so she's going to level up very quickly, and with her great growth rates and good base stats, she'll be capable for the entire game once you get her. Her biggest flaw is definitely her availability. She shows up way too late in the game to genuinely be one of the best units in there, but she's very solid for the amount of time that you have her. So yeah, Tiki is really underrated in Awakening in my opinion. I feel like a lot of people overvalue the difficulty to get her, which I'll admit her paralog is difficult, but doing it gets you a genuinely solid unit for the rest of your run. Strongly recommend it. So, if Naui is a growth unit that shows up a little too late with base stats that make it hard to take advantage of her good growths, Na is that same exact thing, but joins even later, and it's really just not worth it to use her. Yeah, depending on the father, you could get a Na that can grow into something better than Naui and Tiki. Having Naui paired off with Donald can be kind of fun for an aptitude Na, but the amount of effort you have to put into Na is not worth the payoff of whatever she's going to become. First of all, to even recruit Na, that probably means you've been using Naui, and if you've used Naui enough to get her with an S support with someone, she's probably at the point where her growths have kicked in and she's usable. So why would you want to use Na? And also, like I said earlier, Tiki's right there, and you do not need 3 manaketes. If you really like Na as a character, she can work just like Naui can work, but it's just a lot of effort. She's not one of the children that can take off immediately. Fire Emblem Fates does not have manaketes in the traditional sense. Up until now in the series, if your unit is a dragon unit, that's all they do. They transform into a dragon, and you would have to reclass them into an entirely separate thing if you wanted them to do something else. However, in Fates, the Dragonstone is just a part of the main Lord Corrin's arsenal. The idea is if you use the Dragonstone, Corrin becomes an incredible defensive juggernaut, but their ability to actually kill things goes down. Whereas if you use the Yato or another sword, their offensive prowess is great, but they're a bit more frail. That's the general design philosophy behind the Dragonstone in Fates, and I actually really like that. Though I talked about Corrin in my Fire Emblem Lords video, so I don't really have a point to bring them up again. You can just go watch that video. But watch the whole hour-long thing so I get, views and ad revenue and stuff. Don't just jump to the Corrin part. That being said, there is a unit I can talk about. Corrin's child, Kana, who I did not talk about on the Lords video because I definitely meant to use them here and didn't just forget about them. Nah. Considering that Corrin is one of the strongest units in the entire franchise, you would think their child would also be really good. No. Kana's problem is that their stats are just not good enough to keep up. Yeah, they have the same niche as Corrin, but they don't get the Yato, so their offensive presence isn't very good, at least in comparison to them, and they just take too long to get online with their poor stats. Yes, they can be anything you want, except useful. Their only saving grace is that because they're Corrin's children, they can join really early on because Corrin is probably going to be the first S support you get in the game. But beyond that, they really don't have anything special. No matter what skills or class options you pass down to them, they're just not going to be good enough at using them to do anything. The Dragonstone is neat, it's just not enough to make Kana good. We're going to move quickly past Echoes and Three Houses, as those two games do not have playable dragon units in any way. The enemy dragons in Gaiden are once again the fucked up Necro Dragons and the even more fucked up final boss against Duma. And Three Houses does have the final boss against Rhea as a dragon on 2 of the routes, and she's fought similar to how any demonic beast is fought. Gambits to break her shields, and then you go fuck her up. So while these are cool dragons, they're not really anything to talk about. They're bosses, not units that you can actually control. Unfortunate, but due to the lore of the games, it makes sense why you don't have any playable dragons. Well, you technically have playable dragons with Seth and Flame, but you know what I mean. Fire Emblem Engage did not have dragon units in the game at launch. Technically, Alear and Vale are the dragon unit type, but not in the sense that they transform into dragons, more so they get buffs when using the emblem rings that other units don't. That's kinda neat, but also very much not what I'm talking about with Dragon Unit. However, in the Fire Emblem Engage DLC, 2 new Dragon units were added to the game from an alternate dimension, and these units properly use Dragon Stones and fight with their unique Dragon class, so we actually have something to talk about here. And disclaimer, I have never played the Fire Emblem Engage DLC. What I'm about to say is pure hearsay from other people who have told me how good these units are. So if I get something wrong, blame all of my friends and not me. I am blameless and always correct in everything I do. The dragon units in Fire Emblem Engage are of the Fell Child class, the same thing that Vale has, but unlike Vale, they're able to use Dragon Stones and then another weapon that's unique to each of the 2 of them. I actually really like how the Dragon Stones are implemented. They kind of feel like Tiki's selection of Dragon Stones from Fire Emblem 3, with each stone having a different niche. All stones have enemy defense and resistance when attacking, allowing you to do really solid damage, and when you're equipped with the Dragon Stone, you cannot be broken by enemies, meaning that the Dragon units have a very solid enemy phase that a lot of other units in the game can't have due to fear of being broken. And on top of that, the basic Fell Dragon Stone can be forged and given a unique property. You can make it a magical weapon, you can increase its strength and make it 1-2 range, you can give it effectiveness against flyers, or effectiveness against cavalry, making it very versatile to whatever it is you want to do. It's a very cool way of implementing Dragon Stones that I wish was in Engage's base game. But regardless, it's here in the DLC, and it's got 2 units that can take advantage of it. Nell is considered to be the better of the 2 dragon units, and she's very solid. She has great stats overall, though with an emphasis on speed over the other dragons in the game, and can function in an army incredibly easily. She doesn't need any time to get the ball going, she's strong from the moment you get her for the rest of the game. And her personal skill meshes really well with the fact that the Dragon Stones let her have a strong enemy phase, granting her a crit bonus for the rest of the turn if she's ever attacked. She's very competent, can use any emblem ring very well due to the dragon buff that Alear and Vale also get. She's just a really solid unit that should go into your army the moment you get her, and you don't really have much of a reason to ever have her leave. She's not game-breaking, but she is very solid. The second unit, Rafal, is very useful, but he suffers from a poor first impression. He's a mandatory deployment in the DLC, and he is not very helpful there, and that can give a lot of players a bad taste in their mouth when trying to use him. But once you get him out of the DLC, he's going to contribute very well, being more focused on raw strength and bulk as compared to Nell's speed, which means he is a little worse because his stats aren't as good, but that doesn't mean he's bad, not even remotely. His emphasis on strength and build means that he can use any axe in the game without being worried about getting weighed down too much, and when using the breath attacks, he's going to do a lot of damage. He's another very solid unit who, just because he's not as good as the other dragon and not very good in the DLC, doesn't mean he can't contribute in a very meaningful way. Genuinely, some solid dragon units that I really wish weren't DLC. The way that Dragon Stones are implemented are really cool, and I wish they were usable in the base game, but what are you gonna do? Actually, there is one problem with the Dragon units in Engage. You have to play the DLC to unlock them. Okay, sure, that makes sense. But you have to do it every single playthrough. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, once you beat the DLC, you got the 4 rats whenever you wanted. You would go down to the Abyss, and you don't need to replay all of Ashen Wolves every time you want them. In Fire Emblem Echoes, you only had to complete 2 maps to get 4 units. It's not nearly the same as having to replay the entire Fire Emblem Engage DLC every single playthrough. That's really obnoxious, and it's to the point where people who have the DLC just don't do it every time because it's not worth dealing with it just for some admittedly pretty good units. I don't know how Engage botched the DLC that bad, when DLC content's usually the thing Fire Emblem does pretty decently, but what are you gonna do? Dragon units in Fire Emblem have usually had at least something they can do in every game that they're in. Shadow Dragon Bond 2 and New Mystery Bond 2 notwithstanding, and I've really liked using them every time. Dragons are a staple in fantasy, but they're really a staple for Fire Emblem too. Every single game has dragons in there somewhere, and that's awesome. Be it in lore, or as a unit, I can't wait to see how dragons are in the continued future of the series. With the next game being a Three Houses universe game, I don't know how dragons are exactly going to come into play, but you know as well as I do that they're gonna be in there somewhere, and when we do see them, they're gonna be freaking awesome. God bless you fire-breathing lizards. I would like to thank you all very much for making it to the end of the video. These videos are always a lot of fun to make, I've really enjoyed editing them, and I hope you laughed and learned something along the way. If there's any class you would like to see covered in the future of this series, please let me know in the comments below. I do read them, and if you let me know you want to see something, I might just give it to you. Also, please don't forget to like and comment and subscribe, all that good old stuff, and consider joining my Discord server or following me on Twitter and Blue Sky. Links to all of that in the description below. And before we wrap up, I would like to thank my patrons, whose continued support make this channel more and more possible with every passing day. My patrons include the likes of Adebayo Thompson, Alex Arliga, Amu is not beating the Tails allegations, Andrew Crockett, Bean Juice, Benz Again, Dr. McBackstab, Hell on Heelys, Jae Hyun, Despacito 2, Larmachi, Ly-7ing Bolt, Marked War Criminal, Morga Lorgan, Plaid Arrow, Plaid is pronounced like the pattern, Ranger Man Sam, Sean Vossi, Shen Lu, Viri the Artist, Yugirl Owen, Brentendo 11, Drew Hack, Fire Emblem Lord, Ginger, Gugu Gaga Cornelia Milkers 92, Inverse, Lev Maverick, Maple Knight, Sombret, and Upscale Furry Trash. Thank you all for your continued support, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.